This video, I'm going to be making and reviewing something from the Villians cookbook. As if you guys have guessed, holding a second cookbook here. It's actually a 2-for recipe. Even though this is in the Villians cookbook, which is the official cookbook that I'm doing the challenge with, it's also in this other cookbook that I bought, which is, part of like the same series, which you can tell, Tiana's cookbook. And in Tiana's cookbook, it's called Snake Stew. But in the Villians cookbook, it's called Serpent Stew. And it's actually not Tiana inspired in the Villians book. It's actually Jafar inspired from Aladdin is one of the villains. But I'll show you a picture here of the Serpent Stew. So it's a stew, basically. Soup. I was like combining stew and soup into one word there. And it's 2 parts. So the first part is that you make these little breadsticks, which you basically take pizza dough, you roll it out, you shape them like these little snakes, like you can see in the pictures here. And you put some peppercorns for their eyes, and you put them in the oven and bake them. That's basically how you do. I don't think I'm giving away anything secret there. The other part is the stew part. And the stew part's got a few different combinations. It's got chorizo, onions, kale, and potatoes, and a few other things. And you kind of make it in different steps. So we're gonna get started here in just a minute and go through the whole process. So here I'm taking my pizza dough and just kind of cutting it into, like it says, 12 even sections. Now I'm flouring the surface as I get ready to roll the dough out into a thin shape to try to make it look more like a snake. After I got it rolled out to what I thought was an appropriate width and length, I am rolling it up now to make a snake shape. And you can do all kinds of fun shapes with this, which I do like. It can be coiled up or it can be a little bit more loose. Here I'm just putting the little small pieces of peppercorns to make their eyes. There's my snake. My snake breadsticks ready to go into the oven. Here are my breadsticks out of the oven. They look a little big like they just ate, but time to move on to making the stew. Okay, so here I have my chorizo sauteing and cooking. I'm supposed to cook this for about 8 minutes. Then I'm gonna take the chorizo off and then I'll work on the next step. Okay, so I think my chorizo is pretty well cooked. So I have this bowl here, and this bowl I actually bought through a Pampered Chef party several years ago and I really like it. It's not super big, but it's really well insulated and helps keep things like hot or cold. So if you've got something like for a dish that you need to keep warm for later, I do recommend looking into something like this. Doesn't necessarily have to be Pampered Chef. Again, I don't recommend products because I'm being sponsored or anything. These are things I've found that I like and I use them. They've come in handy. All right, so let's get all the chorizo in here. It smells pretty good. I've really grown to like chorizo a lot in recent years. Is anybody else out there a chorizo fan? Comment in the comments if you are. All right, so I'm gonna keep the lid on this. Next, we're gonna saute the onions in basically the olive oil and chorizo juice for a few minutes. It says to saute them for about 3 minutes so they get soft. Then I'm going to add the garlic, saute for another minute, and then I'll add like my broth and spices and stuff. Okay, Get ready to add my pepper, and I just want to say that the onion with the garlic sauteed in olive oil with the chorizo juices smells amazing. This is a fresh bottle of salt, so I'm really scared it's going to come out fast. Yeah, there we go. That. Alright. I was a little bit worried about the salt content. Some chorizos and things can be a little salty. Doctor said to watch the salt a little bit, so I did use for my chicken broth. I got reduced sodium chicken broth, but I'm going to add chicken broth now. Also supposed to add 3 cups of water to this. So here's one I have prepared. So now the next step is I need to bring this to a boil. Once it comes to a boil, I'll add the potatoes and let it simmer. Okay, my broth is boiling, so I'm going to add the diced potatoes to this. Be careful not to burn myself. All right, so then now the next step is I'm going to reduce this to a simmer, and I'm going to let this cook and boil for about 12 to 15 minutes or so until the potatoes get nice and soft. Hi. I always feel weird, like I want to make sure you can see the ingredients. I don't necessarily care about seeing me because I'm always a hot mess. But I think the potatoes are pretty much nice and soft. So I'm going to move on to the next step, and it says you're supposed to put about half of this into a blender and blend it, and then add it back to the pot. And then you add in your beans and your kale. I've read the ingredients a few times, and it never actually mentions when you put the chorizo back. So I'm just going to put it back in when I put everything back in together. But let's start with getting my oven mitts and getting half of this into the, cover my arms here, so just in case, get some of this into the blender so that I can blend it. I feel like it's a little broth heavy, so I'm going to just use my spoon to get a few of the potatoes out. I've done some other soups in the past where they have you blend some of the ingredients. Sometimes, you know, you blend them all because you're making like a squash soup or something that really kind of boils everything down. This, I think, just adds like a thickening agent to the sauce by doing this. All right, it's a nice liquid puree. It's going back into the soup along with the beans. It said just use a white bean. I'm using navy beans. I actually bought a larger can because I have something else I'm going to be making this week from the cookbooks that uses some of it. I'm going to add back the chorizo. All right, now I've got my kale. I'm gonna add this in. This is when it's gonna cook because it says like half a head, about 6 cups. So I know that this will wilt. All right, give this a good stir. And it says to let this cook and simmer for about 8 minutes or so till the beans are cooked and the kale has kind of wilted down some. All right, so here's my soup basically done. It has a very ham and bean soup smell, which kind of makes sense. You know, it's got potatoes and beans in it, just instead of ham, it's got chorizo. All right, it's taste test time. First, I'm going to start with my just eaten or pregnant steaks. I don't know what you call them. I mean, they're definitely poofy. So we'll take a taste test of these first. I mean, yeah, it tastes like pizza dough. So I don't know what to say. Definitely be better with like a little marinara or something. Actually, I'm going to try to dip a little dip of it in the broth. Yeah, dip it in the broth. A little bit better, for sure. All right, let's get to the soup part. I'm trying to let it cool. All right, so I wanted to get a bite that had a little bit of everything, a potato, chorizo, the kale. No, that's pretty tasty. It reminds me of a ham and bean soup. And the first bite is like, oh, I don't know. It seems like it might be a little bland, but the chorizo really kicks in at the end and gives it a nice punch, which I really like. Okay, so as usual, for you, it'll be like 10 seconds away. But for me, I'm going to eat this and maybe enjoy it over a couple of days, see how it holds up. And then I'll give my final thoughts and reviews. Review time! The serpent stew was delicious. Both me and my husband both really, really enjoyed it. And I was a little nervous about it because I know like he's not a big kale fan. And I'm only so-so on kale. Like I can eat it, it doesn't bother me, especially cooked in things. But this worked really well in there. And I made sure not to overpower the kale when I made it, honestly, too. I think I ended up using a little less than what it called for because I didn't want it to be too much. But yeah, everything worked well together. The chorizo with the beans and the tomatoes and the flavor, it was just all spot on. Now, the only thing I didn't really care about was the breadsticks. I mean, it was just dough. I mean, they weren't bad at all. They were just pizza dough, so they weren't terrible. But I was like, they're just breadsticks. But it was fun making the snake shape, and I could see that being something really fun. If you've got kids and you want to do like something fun like that with them, I think that would be great. And as I think I mentioned, you'll see something similar coming up in another recipe. But anyway, so let's get into the rankings and the reviews. The first is the ingredients on a scale of 1 to 5. And I'm going to put these at like a 2. Nothing was really hard to find. It was pretty easy to find. The pizza dough, the potatoes, the chorizo. I think the peppercorns were something I found easily, but those and the chorizo, you know, chorizo is a little expensive, and the peppercorns, I don't know. I don't think you necessarily needed them. I did like the little crunch they put in the breadstick, but I don't think they were needed. So that's what I'm gonna give it 2, just cost-wise, but I didn't find it hard to find anything. Difficulty level on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being easy and 5 being pretty complex. And I'm kind of, these rankings are based on basically most of the stuff in this cookbook, which nothing is super, super hard. So, but I am gonna give it a 3, only because I'm just looking at this again to make sure. There's a lot of different steps involved. First, you have the breadsticks, which, you know, to make them like a snake, they are fun and it's different, but you know, I mean, obviously I rolled mine out to like the size I thought I was supposed to, and those suckers were still pretty thick. I don't know if you saw, I joked that they had apparently just eaten, you know, because they were pretty big breadsticks. So those, you know, like with that, and then, you know, when you do the stew and stuff, you have to add things in different stages. You have to take some of it out and blend it in a blender and then put it back in. Whereas some soups, you know, I tend to like soups where I can just kind of throw everything together in a pot or in a crock pot and let it cook all day. So this one has a few more steps involved. So that's why I'm giving it the 3 rating. And then would I make this again on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being never and 5 being absolutely? So the soup is a 5. The absolutely loved it. It was really good. It was tasty. So I definitely will make it again someday. The breadsticks, though, you know, if I've got extra pizza dough laying around, or again, if maybe I've got like my niece and nephew or some kids coming over and we wanted to do something fun, I would do those. So those are more like a 2, you know, like that would be like a special occasion. But otherwise, I'm not going to worry about the breadsticks part. But the soup part, yes, absolutely will make it again. It was delicious.